to engage and dialogue in trying to find solutions to Africa's challenges. Today's theme is peace and security for an integrated, united, and sustainable Africa. I would like to recognize our heads of state also who are here. His Excellency Bakili Muluzi, His Excellency Olusegun Obasanjo, His Excellency Mohamed Monsef Mazuki, His Excellency Chakaya Kokete, His Excellency Hassan Sheikh Mohamud. We also have among us the Honorable Justice Bartma Turebe from Uganda, Chief Justice of Uganda. We also have here the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of International Relations and Cooperation from Namibia, and Minister of Defense of Zimbabwe, and Defense and Veteran Affairs, Uganda, and the Minister of International Affairs and Cooperation, Botswana. A number of guests also who are here from various institutions, and the trustees of the two co-hosting institutions, the Thabo Mbeki Foundation as well as Ungozi Institute. In beginning our program, I would like to invite one of the co-hosts to actually welcome us here and also tell us a bit why you are here. His Excellency, President Mbeki, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Let me say welcome indeed to everybody. This is those my instructions that I must welcome all of you, which I do. Welcome. On behalf of President Mkapa, the Ungozi Institute and the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, welcome indeed to South Africa and to this conference. I must say that we are very, very pleased indeed that we are able to meet here. As has been indicated, the African Leadership Forum has been meeting in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. And then President Mkapa said to me a few months ago that why don't we this time convene here? Which is how we become co-host. To discuss a matter that all of us are aware of. The chairperson has just said I must explain to everybody why you are here, but I think all of you know why you are here. So there's no need for me to explain that. It's an important topic, obviously, the issue of peace and security on our continent. Obviously, because of the challenges that we continue to face. And they are with us, they are visible every day. And I think that many of us here would also sense that even in some of our countries where there's no conflict yet of a violent kind, that it may very well be that it might break out at some point when one looks at the trends and does some kind of early warning system, that there may very well be some other instances where this violence, instability, peace and security might disappear. So we are very, very glad indeed that you are here. And indeed it is hoped that that what should come out of here is not, as indeed as I think has been said, not that just we met and had a lovely conversation among ourselves. Let's have a lovely conversation. But also let's have some outcomes, because we want to feed into some processes on the continent, actually physically, practically to address the challenge. So hopefully we would all of us focus on this in that way, not so much to describe the problem and the challenge, not only that, but also to say that we believe that this is the way forward. And indeed, I think it should be possible for that to happen because the room is full of very brainy people. And then hopefully the brains then will be put to use in that manner. So that at the end, because at the end, the Uongozi Institute and the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, and it's assisted by the University of Witwatersrand Governance School, will need to produce a report about this. And I'm saying that hopefully that report would also have some indication as to what else needs to be done for us to be able to address what is a real practical challenge, which is claiming too many lives of people, blocking the way to development, blocking the way towards national unity, towards integration of the continent, and therefore an important challenge. And I'm quite certain that given who is in the room, it should be possible for us, even you have Chief Justice here from Uganda, even to deal with questions of justice. Where does justice belong in all this? Issues of peace and justice, always a controversial matter. But in the end, that we will come out with some views as to what might be done more, additional, actually to address what is an important strategic challenge. But otherwise, welcome and apologies for bringing you to a cold Johannesburg, but it will warm up during the day. Thanks a lot and welcome.
Thank you very much, President Mbeki, for welcoming us here and indeed sharing with us what is it that we would like to achieve out of this dialogue. When I looked at the program and looked at who was going to be here, particularly from our excellencies, one thing that struck me was the kind of leadership that we hear, who continue to be activists for development in their countries, but also in the continent, actually served at a very important time in history of our continent, when we're transiting from the Organization of African Unity to the African Union. And they were very central in framing what will be the agenda for Africa going forward in various elements. We'd recall that during their tenure, they actually were very central in building the new partnership for Africa's development, but also ensuring that governments work with their citizenry to champion development in their countries. So they are what I marveled was that they never stopped, they never retired when they left office. They continue to be active, actually more busy than they were before, but still committed to that ideal of transforming and developing our continent. And I must say that it's humbling that we have them here to continue the dialogue and work with us in finding solutions. And I think one of the things, in my view, that this forum represents, it's how civil society and the various formations in our continent themselves will find expression on what they can do individually as organizations and collectively to ensure that we continue to transform and develop our continent. I now would like to invite our keynote speaker for this dialogue, Our Excellency, former President of Nigeria, His Excellency Olusegun Obasanjo, was President of Nigeria from 1999 to 2007. He oversaw his country's first democratic handover of power and administrative reforms that accelerated economic growth. He was a career soldier before serving twice as head of state. He served as a military ruler from February 1976 to October 1979. President Obasanjo has played a pivotal role in the regeneration and repositioning of African Union, including helping to establish the new Partnership for Africa's Development and the African Peer Review Mechanism, designed to promote democracy and good governance. He has consistently supported the deepening and widening of regional cooperation through the Economic Community of West Africa. And Core Prosperity Alliance Zone incorporating Benin, Ghana, Nigeria, and Togo. He has served as chairman of the Group of 77, chairman of the Commonwealth Heads of Government Meeting, and chairman of NEPAD Heads of State and Government Implementation Committee. His Excellency has also been involved in international mediation efforts in Angola, Burundi, Namibia, Mozambique, and South Africa. In 2008, the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon appointed him as his special envoy to the Great Lakes region, where he has played an integral part in mediation efforts in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. I now want to welcome His Excellency to address us.
You shouldn't have had to go over all that. If you have read all that in Nigeria, you will probably have not got any applause at all, because Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I was suspicious when President Benjamin Mkapa wrote me a letter inviting me for this meeting, because the two previous meetings he invited me, but he did not mention in the two previous meetings that he was conspiring with President Thabo Mbeki. And when you have the two of them conspiring together, I felt a little bit uneasy. Then I met President Mkapa. We met recently, and I think I got the date of this meeting wrong, and you quickly corrected me. Where was that we met? Huh? Kigali. Then I said I will come. Here I am. I have come. I believe that the issue that the two of them have tabled for discussion at this conference is very, very important and very basic. And we will, of course, want to see where we are and where we go from here, and how do we get to where we should be. But I believe that before we move to where we should go, we should know where we are coming from. And my presentation will take a little bit of where we are coming from, where we are, and of course, where we should go. I feel particularly honored to be in your midst at the invitation, as I said earlier, of President Benjamin Mkapa and the leadership of African Leadership Forum 2017. I am pleased that the trail that began with President Thabo Mbeki, who gave the first keynote address at the first forum, On a pertinent theme is what we now continue. This gathering couldn't have come at a better time than now, when the world at large, and Africa in particular, are grappling with threat of peace and security in so many forms, degrees, and dimensions. Let me attempt our theme to discuss as put in question form, what are the issues and circumstances that hinder peace and security, and therefore development, and what needs to be done to curb them for sustained peace and security in our continent. With some understanding by all of us, let me do a bit of unusual and go into the genesis of conflicts as contained in the Bible. The first conflict was that between husband and wife, Adam and Eve, in eating or not eating the forbidden fruit. With only two people on earth, a man and a woman, there was conflict. Call it domestic, family, or what you will, it was conflict. It required the Creator himself, God, to intervene and to apportion blame and resolve it. That's how serious even that family conflict was. The second recorded conflict in the Bible was more costly and deadly, and it was between two brothers, Abel and Cain. It led to Cain killing Abel, his brother, out of envy, greed, intolerance, lack of consideration for the other man, and lack of fear of God. Again, God intervened to be the arbiter and pronounce judgment on Cain, who thought that nobody saw him when he killed his brother, thereby instituting the first deadly conflict. The Bible is replete with conflicts among families, communities, peoples, and between and among nations. Even Jesus Christ declared his mission as, and I quote, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed," and of course you cannot be oppressed without conflict, "and to proclaim the year of the favor of the Lord's favor." That's in Luke chapter 4, verses 18 to 19. I have observed that from the biblical times till today, the nature of man has not changed, and God has always intervened in the affairs of humankind and human organizations and institutions to relieve, manage, and alleviate conflicts and oppressions. To recall the history of the world, the scholars and chroniclers of world history have been bound by acts of conflict, treachery, conquest, domination, suppression, oppression, exploitation, injustice, and enslavement. Most of Africa, in different stages, came under this cruel regime of callousness, insensitivity, and worst of human inhumanity against humanity. This was essentially the legacy of slave trade, slavery, colonization, and domination inherited at independence. Balkanization and arbitrary divisions were embarked upon to strengthen the evil regimes over Africa. I am not approaching this discourse as a novice. I have experienced conflict in its various trajectories. Ladies and gentlemen, for over 50 years, I have been involved in peacemaking, peace building, peacekeeping, conflict prevention and management across Africa. I have been an interloper in various sectors. I have been a force of good in many others, and in some rare instances, a victim of the evil machinations of conflicts. Let me share with you a few insights of those conflicts that I was involved as a peacekeeper, peacemaker, or peace bargainer, but nonetheless a very active participant, and from which we can distill my informed knowledge of the causes and causes of conflict on the continent of Africa. It will also help in charting a roadmap to sustain peace and security for the development of our continent. I started my public life and career as a soldier, and the first theater of operation for me was Belgian Congo, or Congo-Leopoldville, now Kinshasa, where I was shipped to because of the ensuing conflict in that country, even as my own nation was preparing for independence in 1960. I recall that while on the UN peacekeeping mission, many peacekeepers, including Nigeria's colleague of mine, Lieutenant Subana, paid the supreme price over a needless war of attrition. Democratic Republic of Congo has not enjoyed desirable peace and security since then. By the last decade of the last millennium, my sub-region of West Africa was the very epitome of conflict, with Liberia and Sierra Leone as hot spots. In Liberia, an estimated 250,000 people died, and Charles Taylor felt no scruples about the several hundreds of thousands wounded and displaced. Taylor didn't leave the casualties to his country alone. He veered into neighboring Sierra Leone and started stoking insurrection by actively aiding the Revolutionary United Front led by Fode Sanko. By August 2003, when I was starting my second term as President of Nigeria and AU Chair, we offered a deal to Taylor to resign and be granted asylum in Nigeria. That move brought back peace to Liberia and Sierra Leone, and I became a butt of criticism after the long arms of international law caught up with Taylor in my country. But I am proud of that kind of diplomacy that successfully terminated wars. President Thabo Mbeki, Shisano, and John Kufuor were fellow travelers with me in that venture. You will no doubt agree that the return of President Menezes to power in Democratic Republic of Sao Tome and Principe was a remarkable achievement for trying to resolve our problems in Africa by ourselves. The reaction to the military adventurers, the process of negotiation, as well as my presence in Gabon and in Democratic Republic of Sao Tome and Principe, to ensure an end to the military action, had certainly sent a strong signal to military officers contemplating extra-constitutional means to subvert democratically elected governments in Africa. A couple of years ago, I led the African Union and the United Nations Human Rights Council on peace mission to the South Sudan conflict. Like most conflicts, violence was triggered by a rift between President Salva Kiir and Vice President Riek Machar, and quickly degenerated into an ethnic conflict, particularly among two major ethnic groups, the Dinka and the Nuer, culminating in a very, very bad situation. The new country, with great promise, is still entangled in the conflict that could go the way of Rwanda. When crisis that left Guinea-Bissau without a government for 37 days broke out, President Muhammadu Buhari, along with ECOWAS leaders, enlisted me to stabilize the situation, while interfacing with the dramatic personnel of the conflict. President of Guinea-Bissau, Jose Mario, and the Prime Minister, Correa, we discovered that elements of human hubris were at work. For harmony to reign in that country, we discovered the inevitability of power sharing as envisaged by the authors of the Guinea-Bissau Constitution, which splits the executive arm of government into the presidency, the National Assembly, and the premiership. We cannot go on and on, or we can go on, and I've seen that the dynamics of power and human beings' insatiable urge to superintend others and disregard their feelings are at the heart of instability and conflicts in countries around Africa. Back home in Nigeria, beside the 30-month civil war between 1967 and 1970, which I had the good fortune of ending and collecting the instrument of surrender from the rebels, as we call them, and they call us vandals, on behalf of the federal government of Nigeria, we have had several cases of internecine conflicts, like most African countries. They are caused by poor leadership, inequity, real and perceived injustice, and conscienceless pursuit of power. At the most microscopic or micro level, anywhere in Africa, conflict are a product of power struggle or squabbles with some mindless power elite taking more than a fair share of what is due to all, and thus undermining the weaker elements in the midst and domains. Whether it is on this settler indigenous crisis in Jos Plateau, or the Modakeke Ife, or even the Umuneri Aguleri in my native Nigeria or elsewhere in Africa, the stories are the same, with strands of difference only on who tells the story. I participated and resolved 2 of those conflicts that I've just mentioned. Aguleri, Muleri on the bank of the River Niger, and Ife Mudakeke in the southwest, which have been raging for over a century. We as leaders can cast back our minds and replicate in our different social, cultural, and political or economic settings and see if power sharing and unfair-minded leadership with selfishness and lack of adequate consideration do not rank high in why Africans have turned to bearing arms against fellow compatriots in needless conflicts and wars, when socioeconomic development and inclusion should have been our priority. The question that should agitate the mind of anybody with a modicum of humanity is, if we all desire peace and security, why is it difficult for people to embrace peace, and why is security elusive in almost all parts of the globe and in less quantity and quality in Africa? Another question is, do people just mouth security without understanding the concepts, precepts, practice, and desiderata for it? For me, peace signifies a situation of harmony and concord, or put in another word, it is a state of tranquility. In effect, peace is opposed to organized disequilibrium. It presupposes absence of low or high-level conflicts, violence, or any kind, including conventional, unconventional, or prosecution of hot or cold war. It may refer to an internal state of mind or of nations, or to external relations. In effect, peace then is the absence of war and more. No nation can yet claim absolute security, because a peaceful and secure country should not have ingrained in the people's psyche the fear of violations of their persons and property by either criminals or organized state apparatus in pursuit of extortion or other humiliating experiences that many of our people are subjected to in the hands of rogue or failing states. Intellectually minded people have traditionally considered peace to mean the absence of war, but as we can see, it is narrow prescription for a world that is in a permanent state of tension, in the hands of powerful nations, powerful people, and elements and circumstances. No hungry man is at peace. That is why we now have terms like food security. No man at the mercy of weather or whose home or farm is being devastated by flood, tsunami, sand dunes, desertification, or pestilence, or mudslide can claim to be at peace. This is why we have environmental crisis. I saw the true situation and the devastation and destruction in Sierra Leone only yesterday, where at least 1,000 people were swept into death by flood and mudslide. Peace and war may have been binary oppositions before, but we now have intermediaries to these nebulous characterizations of how they appear. In terms of international relations, peace may have been construed to mean absence of states engaging in open confrontations with one another. The concept, I think, is more vast, tenuous, and crafty in its manifestation. I say this because national security and national defense are thus contradictory, since we need the instrument of war, military, to pursue peace. The post-Cold War era brought to the fore other realities. Today, cold peace has replaced Cold War. Competition has become fiercer than ever before. Economic survival, environmental issues, religious ideologies, and issues of injustice, hunger, starvation, unemployment, poverty, and sustainable development have degenerated into tension, claiming more casualties than in the battlefields and the two world wars known to man. The plight of individuals, the quality of lives of individuals within their immediate environments are now of concern. More people have been robbed of their pursuit of a happy, comfortable, and joyous livelihood by extraneous consideration because of inept and corrupt leadership across various spheres. How do we, as leaders, engender the absence and fear of our helpless, and frustrated citizens? I have heard stories of economic migrants and how many die in search of peace and greener pastures beyond the Sahara Desert, and many perish in the Sahara and on the Mediterranean Sea because of the harsh and economic realities foisted on them by corrupt, inept, and clueless leaders at different levels. The United Nations High Commission for Refugees said that human trafficking and migrant flows are on the rise. The UNHCR also warned that with 84,830 people arriving on Italy's shores so far this year from Libya, it represents a 19% increase from the same period last year. Already, over 2,108 had died while trying to make the perilous cross, often organized by ruthless smugglers in unseaworthy and rickety boats. These are all signs that peace has taken a flight, not because of war, but because of ill-conceived and poorly implemented policies and graft by mindless and poor leadership. Today, we live in a world where there is still competition. Now, there are stresses and strains across the globe, with crises in Yemen, Iraq, and Syria, and the brewing tension across the South China Sea and North Korea. Africa has to begin to look for solutions to its peace and security issues from within. What is more, many European countries, such as Britain, France, Germany, and Belgium, which in the past intervened in African crises, now have to grapple with internal attacks by terrorists, whether homegrown or imported. And for the election of President Donald Trump of the United States of America, with his American first anti-globalization policies, we Africans simply do not have the luxury of waiting for outsiders to solve our problems for us. And in any case, their intervention have been mostly inimical to African interest, even when they intervened in the past. No matter the manifestation of conflict, two issues are germane. The capacity to manage conflicts is crucial. Here, leadership deficit on our continent allows conflicts to fester until they become wars that claim several lives. The second is the unmanaged destructive conflicts, usually hinder the progress and development of any society. When conflict blooms, each party to a conflict resolves to win at all costs. This tends to lead to wanton destruction of lives and properties as emotions take precedence over reason. I'll just give a few of conflicts that we have had. Border conflicts such as Eritrea and Ethiopia, development conflict such as Democratic Republic of Congo and Darfur in Sudan, marginalization conflict, real or perceived, such as southeastern Nigeria, poor leadership and bad governance conflict, such as Burundi and Guinea-Bissau, electoral conflict, such as Central African Republic, and we have that in Kenya as well, induced conflict, such as Mali and Libya, resource-based conflict, such as in Libya, Sudan, and South Sudan, and Niger Delta militancy in Nigeria, fundamentalist conflicts, religious or nationalistic, such as in Egypt. Just as I was mulling on how to script something for this occasion, I watched a report on the BBC where there were allegations of killings by rival militias in the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. My mind flipped back to the late 1950s and early 1960s. Already elsewhere, there is the Boko Haram insurgency that we haven't completely overcome. It has ravaged the northeastern part of Nigeria, as well as parts of Chad, Cameroon, and Niger republics. I was involved in finding out causes, and I know the consequences of action and inaction of those who were supposed to boldly face the challenge of dealing with the issue when it originally started. I found out that refusal of the government to pay compensation as ordered by the court of law to the family of Boko Haram leaders who were innocently killed was partly responsible for the escalation of violent extremism. The escalation of insurgent activities in the northeastern part of Nigeria and the concomitant high cost to human and economic life of people of the region, to a disproportionate use of stick rather than carrot in quelling the insurgency, coalesced with poverty and youth unemployment to rob the people of their peace and the nation of good governance and dividends of democracy. How I wished that the serious conciliatory solution had been embarked upon at the beginning of the crisis. I cannot but partly blame the escalation of the insurgency in the entire region on to inertia of our ruling class. Boko Haram insurgency had killed more than 25,000 people and rendered over 2.3 million people homeless and displaced. And what is more, Boko Haram's accomplice in East Africa, Al-Shabaab, with between 7,000 and 9,000 strong fighters, are separately unleashing catastrophe and destruction across East and West Africa. You will understand why fundamentalism is a menace that must be tackled headlong, because it poses a great threat to the peace and security of all of Africa. Splinter groups of militants and terrorists may have found a temporary abode in Libya, but the place has become an unstable state, if not a failed state, since the Arab Spring swept through it and, with the support of the West, consumed its former leader, Muammar Gaddafi, in 2001. The danger is that when ISIS is defeated in Iraq and Syria, they may find a place in Libya, which will make life uncomfortable for most of us in Africa. While there are other pull and push factors undermining Africa's peace and security, which I will return to shortly, it is of absolute necessity to point out that internal conflict are the singular most prominent immediate circumstances hindering peace and security in Africa. Where internal conflicts take a violent turn, which they often do, other systemic threats to peace and security, such as human rights violation, displacement of people, malnutrition and disease, often follow. The resultant effects of internal conflicts, as well as their intertwinement, are too numerous. A country devastated by conflict relegates democracy and good governance to the background. Its people are often violated by the same institutions that are supposed to protect them, and no sane investors will commit their capital to a country whose climate is destructive. If poverty, hunger, and economic underdevelopment are substantially attributed to violence and conflicts, it is apt to know that peace and security are necessary prerequisites for enjoying whatever dividends democracy, economic development, and social justice are expected to bring to the table. Poverty knitted with uncontrolled population growth is most disturbing phenomenon, breeding social vices and conflicts, including and especially youth restiveness. I told a gathering recently that if African youth are not properly educated, given skill, empowerment, and properly engaged, we are all sitting on a keg of gunpowder, which as a matter of when, not if, will explode in our face in a manner that we could find irredeemable. I know that unemployed young men and women are especially vulnerable to the temptations of violence and could be easily instrumentalized for that purpose. A World Bank survey in 2011 showed that about 40% of those who joined rebel movements and terrorism said they were motivated by lack of jobs. The percentage will be higher today. The biggest issue that hinders peace and security in our continent stems from our political climate and leadership deficiencies. Many conflicts which degenerate to full-blown violence either begin with a political disagreement or are fueled by the politics of control of power, whether it is the political fallout between South Sudan's president, Salva Kiir, and his estranged former Vice President Riek Machar, or the recently renewed and amplified limited agitation for the creation of Biafra in Nigeria, politics is always somewhere at the heart of conflict in Africa. We need less of politics and more of altruistic governance. This now takes me to what needs to be done. Since Africa's security challenges are mainly African-created problems, we should rely less on peacekeepers from outside. The real solution lies in Africa and among Africans. My view is that to stimulate peace and engender security, we must creatively engage progressive-minded Africans in strategic and proactive management of our geopolitical and economic space. Africans themselves must desire and work for peace and security. For a start, we need to build a crop of leaders with the capacity and acumen to steer respective countries away from conflagration. This crop of leaders must be complemented with the building of institutions that could nip potential conflicts in the bud. There's no reason why elections should be followed by violence. The first duty and responsibility of a leader for his or her country is to ensure peace and security as the basis of good governance, economic development, social well-being, and progress and wholesomeness of the polity and the state. Here, let me strongly suggest that the two organizations hosting this forum and similar organizations and institutions in Africa must work separately and together for peace and security in Africa. If I may explain what I mean. Meetings like these are good, conferences like these are good, and we have had, this is the third one. We must supplement this with action on our part. No conflict comes without giving some form of notice. When those notices are given, we must do something about them. We need to revisit the African peace and security architecture, which is built around structures, objectives, principles, and values, as well as decision-making processes relating to the prevention, management, and resolution of crises and conflicts, post-conflict reconstruction and development in the continent. The various components of African peace security architecture, as well as their roles and responsibilities, are outlined in the Peace and Security Council Protocol of December 2003 that African leaders adopted in Durban, here in South Africa, and in July 2002. It contains structures such as the Commission itself, the African Commission, the AU Commission, the Panel of the Wise, the Continental Early Warning System, the African Standby Force, and the Peace Fund. It also defines the relationship between the African Union, which has the primary responsibility for promoting peace, security, and stability in Africa, and the regional economic communities, regional mechanism for conflict prevention, management, and resolution. Through APSA, we have come to realize that collaboration, coordination, and partnership between and among both state and non-state actors are crucial for the promotion of peace, security, and stability in Africa. APSA's peace and security agenda includes the promotion of early warning and conflict prevention, peacemaking, peace support operations, peace building, and post-conflict reconstruction and development, democratic practices, good governance, and respect for human rights, and humanitarian action and disaster management. Provisions of these vital documents should be implemented and strictly adhered to. I personally advocate African solutions for African problems. First, because, like I stated earlier, the international community is already overwhelmed by crises in other parts of the globe, and also because African countries have an accumulated wealth of experience and wisdom derived from indigenous culture that have not been adequately utilized. I hereby call for the strengthening of African Elders Council, a mechanism that builds on African cultural values of mediation and reconciliation in preventing, managing, and resolving interstate and intrastate conflicts. An example of African solution for African problems survives here. When President Muhammadu Buhari of Nigeria was inaugurated in May 2015, one of his first tasks was to launch a joint military operation to curb Boko Haram attacks. Chad, Niger Republic, Cameroon, and Nigeria pooled together human and material resources for the common goal of defeating the group. With understanding of the African Union, though Boko Haram has not been completely annihilated, the successful result of the joint effort is becoming apparent. A similar case was the threatening post-electoral conflict prevented in the Gambia by a collective effort of countries in the West African sub-region early this year. The point must be made that for disputes emanating from elections, all African countries must take resort to elective dispute resolution mechanisms, which are prescribed in every country's electoral law and regulation to avoid dispute developing into conflict. We must, at the same time, pay attention to the humanitarian challenges caused by food insecurity, drought, climate change, and internally displaced persons from conflict areas. In northeastern Nigeria alone, over 2 million people are in need of humanitarian support. In South Sudan, as at May 2017, the United Nations Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has rendered humanitarian support to over 2.5 million people and hopes to provide assistance to up to 5.8 million people. We need innovative approaches from countries in regions prone to crisis through the establishment of common market and regional economic revitalization plans. On the long run, our success will depend on how effective we address the underlying causes of insecurity and instability in our continent by finding lasting solutions to weak governance, weak democratic institutions, and lack of opportunities. Working with regional and international partners, African countries must strengthen their institutions and be more proactive in tackling the security, economic, social, and political and development challenges. Countries must also begin to reconstruct a new social contract with citizens based on trust and inclusion. The keg of gunpowder we are sitting on, our vibrant youth population, has to be educated and meaningfully engaged to be able to be made positively active and taken away from frustration and anger. Let me conclude by saying we must always act locally, regionally, and internationally in our efforts. Such efforts must address the security threat posed by violent extremists and criminal networks, including drug barons, money launderers, and human traffickers, while building capacity and strengthening institutions. Alone, we cannot solve all the peace and security issues of our continent. However, we must be seen as taking a lead role in proffering workable solutions to our problems and spearheading the implementation of whatever solution we proffer, ready to pay the price and make the sacrifices that are necessary. The international community will be more than ready to join hands with us if we are proactive. Once again, I thank you for inviting me to this important meeting. It is my hope that through forums like this, supported with action, our continent will rise up to its full potential and claim its rightful share of global division of labor and decision-making, and of global prosperity in peace and security. God bless Africa.
Thank you very much for that, President Obasanjo, a very comprehensive breakdown of the issues. We are going into our panel session, and in this panel session, we're looking at cementing the foundations for sustainable peace and security. My name is Julie Gishuru. I'm the host of the Africa Leadership Dialogues, and it's an honor to be with you all. I'll be guiding this session. I'll beg your indulgence for a minute as we reposition ourselves. I'll ask the two conspirators, please, President Thabo Mbeki and President Benjamin Mkapa, please to come and take seats at the front here. I will also ask President Jakaya Kikwete, please to take a seat at the front there. President, not all. President Hassan Sheikh Mohammed, please, and President Bukuli, President Bakili, please. Muluzi, please to take a seat at the front. My eyesight is going bad and my memory is even worse, so you will forgive me. I will now welcome our panelists to take their seats at the front. We do have with us, of course, Honorable Olusegun Obasanjo. We have with us His Excellency Mohamed Monsef Marzuki. Please stay with us on the panel. Also joining us up here is Honorable Netumbo Nandi Ndaitwah, Deputy Prime Minister of International Relations and Cooperation of Namibia. I will call up Professor Funmi Olonisakin, Director of the Africa Leadership Center, that's at King's College in London. Please do join us up here, Professor. And Mr. Francois Fall, who is the Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Central Africa. If you would join us up here as well. And as our panelists come up and do take their seats, ladies and gentlemen, we heard from two elders this morning. And if you will allow me to say, the situation in Africa is dire. It is absolutely dire. We have Africans literally dying to leave our continent, literally dying to get out of this continent in search of greener pastures. Ladies and gentlemen, can we agree that that is a shame? Can we agree that that is a shame? And that is why we are here talking about peace and security as a foundation towards transforming the African continent. As we speak this morning, we have about 2 hours. I'm going to come to the panel first for more of their views. And then I'm going to come to the floor, but I'm going to make a request to the panelists and to all our participants, if you will allow me. Please do not state a problem without telling us what you are doing to solve that problem yourself, or what you propose to do to solve the problem, and perhaps we can help you. Because it's time to end the finger pointing on this continent. And each of us, if we stand up and do something, we can make a difference. President Thabo Mbeki was recently in Kenya for the elections and saw what happened. We had tragedy in 2007 and were very scared we would end up in the same place this time. As a media person, I started to understand one of the big problems we had was not understanding the difference between non-violent action, right, and mass action that results in violence. And starting to play a role in changing that narrative and making people understand you can protest peacefully. And there's nothing wrong with that, but protest peacefully. Each of us, me in the media space, I had a responsibility and I did what I could. But ladies and gentlemen, we have a looming crisis because I also realized in Africa we have romanticized violence and demonized peace. And with that, we go into our first session, looking at how now to cement the institutions that we need. Let me start with a brief from each of you. Your unique perspective, your vantage point, what you have seen, what you have learned, what you are doing, or what you can highlight as what needs to be done, and the commitments you can make. Let's start with that brief. And I think Honorable Mohammed, His Excellency, will begin with you. The crisis that Africa has faced, the move now to cement foundations that can make a difference for peace and security, sustainable peace and security, please.
First of all, I would like to thank the Ngozi Foundation Institute and the Hardwicke Foundation for this invitation. You probably know that I'm former president of Tunisia, and as such, let me tell you that I feel proud. We Tunisians feel proud very much because we think that we are the first Africans. Probably you know that the word Africa is the Arab word for the northern part of Tunisia. So we are the first Africans because the beginning, it was the name of this.
That's already a statement that could cause conflict.
Yes. Yes. And then it became the name of the whole Tunisia, and then the name of the whole area of the Maghreb, and then the name of the continent. So we are, yes, madam, yes, we are the first Africans, and we are very proud of. And I can also say that I'm also proud of our peaceful revolution in Tunisia. You probably know that we have had this revolution, which started the wave of revolution in the area. And this revolution is probably one of the most peaceful revolution in Africa and in the Arab world. And when I ask myself why Tunisia have had this chance, because when we compare the outcome of the Arab Spring in Libya, we see the huge difference between Libya and Tunisia. While we are the same people, we share the same language, we share the same culture, we share the same religion, etc. Very, very close. I can say that we are the one people. But the outcome of the Arab Spring in Tunisia and the outcome in Libya is extremely different. Still, we have civil war now in Libya, while in Tunisia, I can say that we are, of course, we didn't resolve all the problems, but in Tunisia, we are a stable, peaceful country. What's the difference? And now I'm going to answer your question. Of course, it's too simplistic, to say that there is just one reason. Of course, there are a lot of reasons, for such a complex phenomenon. We have a set of complex reasons, but I would argue that one of the most important things that in Tunisia we have had always a national dialogue. National dialogue has been always a kind of, national habit, also something like this. We used to have this national dialogue when we were in the opposition. We have had this national dialogue during the revolution. During my presidency, every Friday, we used to have a dinner, with the opponents. We used to have a huge discussion about our differences. And I think this made the difference. While in Libya, they don't have this habit. And I always say that national dialogue, we must have the national dialogue before catastrophe, and not just after catastrophe, because people have to sit together and people have to talk together. But they have to talk before catastrophe and not after catastrophe. And this is why in Tunisia, I think we have had this outcome very different, because we have had this national dialogue going all the time. And 4 months ago, I was in Sudan, and I was very happy to see that our brothers Sudanese also, they came to this conclusion that they have to sit together and they have to discuss. of course, it takes, a new culture, to have this habit of discussing with your rival, with your enemies. It's difficult. I know how difficult it is because I'm a politician and I know how difficult it is to take, to go to the other side and to talk with him and to know that he is a partner and that you have to build the country together. So my opinion is that, of course, once again, I'm not saying that this is the one reason, the one explanation, but I'm quite sure that if we don't promote national dialogue within our countries, we were not going to solve our problems. National dialogue is the most important part of the solution, and its lack or its absence is the most important part of the problem. This is my opinion, and this is why I think this is the message we should give as, all the wisdom former head of states to the young generation. Go and talk to with your enemy, go and talk to your opponent, because you have to share with them power, wealth. If you don't share with them power and wealth, you will have all the time instability, you will have all the time civil war. This is my message.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Let me ask before I leave you and go to the next panelist, what commitment can you make with regard to saying, I can perhaps assist in spreading this kind of culture or explaining how this can better be done? Can you make some kind of commitment for the continent?
Yes, of course. I think, I told you, when I was in Sudan, I proposed to our Sudanese brother to say, look, we in Africa, we badly need this national dialogue. We have some experience in Tunisia. You have some experience in Sudan. So let's see all over the continent the experiences of different parties and sit together and try to find a kind of, way of doing. And then this way of doing, we will try to, to learn to the young generation of leaders.
Thank you, and I think this is something we will note down and definitely take forward as one of the actions that we can look at investing time and effort in and looking at building partnerships around. Let me come now to Honorable Netumbo for your perspective on what we need to be focusing on, or what you are doing as well in terms of cementing institutions and foundations to ensure we have sustainable peace. Your mic is right in front of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and Your Excellencies, being the only one now sitting here who's still in the office. And I think this is a very good thing in the sense that we are exchanging with those who have experienced not being in the office, and then when they enter the office, and now when they are out of the office. And to me, this is really a great hope that Africa is leading to the right direction to solve our problems. The topic is cementing foundation for sustainable peace and security. And I think the President Obasanjo has really elaborated, diagnosed the problem, and where we should be. What I felt, what we should do to cement the foundation for sustainable peace and security, being the prerequisite for sustainable development, is to make sure that the sources of conflict, which has been identified by President Obasanjo, will be our focus to make sure that we address them. And even the pamphlets that were given, they have elaborated the sum. What we need is ownership. Whatever we are doing, when there's a conflict, you need the ownership that everybody or all are part of the process, so that at the end of the day, they safeguard that. I can give my own example. Of course, Namibia had the experience of the liberation struggle. And you recall that when you were fighting, we had the slogans. And after independence, we changed them, because now you are focusing on something else. You know, at the time when Africa was fighting for decolonization of the continent, we had a very clear common denominator for the decolonization of the continent. But now, I'm not sure whether we really have a common denominator for the development of the continent. As a liberation movement, we had our slogan, which is everything for the struggle, all for victory. Independence or death, we shall win. So that was a guiding principle. Namibia got independence, we changed. Swapo united, Swapo victorious, now Hardwicke. And because we knew where we were coming from, we even adopted a policy of national reconciliation, because you want to bring everybody on board. We felt that the situation where we were coming from, which was characterized by apartheid and even by tribal. You come to a capital city window, you have locations for the Hereros, for the Ovambos, for the Namas, for the Tamaras. So you really needed something that can bring everybody together so that you sustain that peace. And we feel that has helped us well, or saved us well to where we are today. But we cannot really say that our peace is not fragile, because the socio-economic situation is still a challenge. There are people who are living in poverty, and we are not ashamed to say it. So that is why currently even our president say we must focus to eradicate poverty. We must all accept that there is poverty. But the central point which is focusing on is to say we must work together on the same direction. And when we set up our program of what we call the Harambe Prosperity Plan, we even decided to use a word which is not part of any of the Namibian local language, Harambe, which is a Swahili word. It means let us work, pull together in the same direction. Because if you could take one, you might be seen maybe you are favoring one. So that is where we are. And another underlining factor is, as our president say, inclusivity spell peace, exclusivity spells conflict. So let people be together. Now, coming to the African continent, I have mentioned earlier that when we were on the decolonization process, we had a common denominator to decolonize the continent. Now we need to develop one. We have Agenda 2063. I have gone through that document. I have seen it being developed. And I can assure you, if all Africans, both in the government and outside the government, the private sector, the civil society, can own up to that Agenda 2063, it can take us a long way. The challenge we are having in Africa, when you were not there, when others are planning, you don't want to be part. As a result, you end up every time you are planning, you are designing something new, and there will never be an implementation. So my dream really is to see the realization of Agenda 2063 to be owned by Africa, to be funded by Africa. Because if you are not funding, you cannot move. Even this forum, if it's not in our hands, if we are not funding it, if we are not managing it, it will not meet our objective. So I'm underlining ownership on everything we do.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for that. What I hear there, ladies and gentlemen, is a rallying call and saying to Africans, we need to build common ground once again. And what is that common ground? It's fighting poverty. It's looking towards development. And do we need, and how do we create that rallying call, and how do we bring all Africans together, rather than as cynics, skeptics, and critics of Agenda 23, but as believers in Agenda 23 and pulling together in the same direction? Professor Funmi, let me come to you next for your perspectives on what we really need to be focusing on. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Try again. Okay.
This works. Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, I constantly try to reflect on this from the perspective of someone who's a teacher, fundamentally, and a student of peace and security. I have studied peace and security, I would say continuously for the past 30 years, not just in Africa, but globally. 12 years ago, I took on a new perspective. I started to bring a leadership perspective into my peace and security studies. And that led us to create what is now called the African Leadership Center, which has so far brought over 100 African fellows from about 21 African countries together, to think together, to begin to think differently about the challenges of our continent. And what are the three things that we've tried to focus on? One, I think President Obasanjo said, if you don't know where you're coming from, you can't know where you're going. I think that's in essence what his statement was about. Our history, a long view of history, will help us understand the current peace and security challenges. Without a long view of history, we might not be able to capture the reality of our continent now. What does that long view of history tell us? It tells us that we built a war-making state rather than a peacemaking state across the board. Why? Because maybe not by our own design initially. We fought for independence, but the states that were created on our behalf, because we did not, those states are not the collective expressions of our citizens about the kind of future they will build together. But nonetheless, we took those states, framed them, kept them as they were. Obviously, externally at the level of the Organization of African Unity, we needed to prevent conflict between states. But within those states, we kept rigidly to the idea that all we needed to do was for governments to claim the monopoly of the means of force. And yet, no country can claim that monopoly of violence, of the means of violence. That's what we did, rather than create, because our states were already going to be conflictual within and without. But we did not ask our own selves, what kind of states will help us collectively realize our aspirations to live long and to live well. And I think we're still dealing with that even in a post-Cold War climate. And we need to return to it through the structures that President Obasanjo was talking about. The second set of things that we deliberate on at the African Leadership Center, taking a leadership perspective to our peace and security analysis, has to do with the idea of leadership itself. If we look at leadership studies over time, as a science or as an art, but especially as a science, nowhere is leadership about the leader. You have been assigned a position, yes, but the leadership, especially in society, in the context of peace and security, is about a process, and it's an interactive process, all right, in pursuit of solutions to our common situation. So if we're pursuing our common situation, of course, during colonial times and in pursuit of independence, we had a common situation continentally. And I think what you were trying to talk about in terms of the common denominator has to do with that. At different moments, continentally, we have had common situations. And our struggle with trying to define ourselves, finding Pax Africana, however we defined it, is one element of it. But our different countries have pursued different tracks. And in many of our countries, up till now, despite the conflicting and the situations and the situations of insecurity, we see leadership as top-down, as something in which a person in a position of authority just simply is the be-all and end-all. It's a big aspect of the problem, and it's not just a cultural issue. I think it's because of the way our states were framed back into history, that system of a war-making state created a set of elite who pursued their own aspirations at the expense of the aspirations of the rest of society. And I think we have to agree the reality. Let's agree with it. That's the reality of our continent. We're not alone in it, but other societies constantly have conversations. And I think the former president talked about dialogues. But conversations are not just about this interaction in a formal way, face-to-face. We do not take note of the conversations that are happening and the conversations of silence. Kenya is a good example for decades. The violent conflict that we experience is also a conversation, which we don't want in order to have positive peace. So ultimately, and last to my last set of points, what therefore we constantly reflect on is what transformations are needed in order to take our continent to the next level. And that transformation has to be about transforming the ideas that shape what we do, but it's about transforming people and transforming the interaction between us. There is no way in any case study that you look at that leadership is coercive. So what President Obasanjo said about power elite and how we interact with power is one fundamental thing that needs to transform. Leadership cannot be about coercive power. The moment it's about coercive power, it has already stopped mediating society. It must be about the collective aspiration of our people and how to manage life in common with our people so that we collectively aspire to live well, live long, and realize our full potential. And I think transforming that is the first starting point. Transforming our states to become peacemaking states instead of war-making states is the second thing that needs to transform. But I think transforming our relationship with the outside world is the next thing. Africa is too often the product of thinking from outside and the product of solutions from outside, even though we state that we want African solutions to African problems. Our states are defined differently from how we really are. Those from outside pursue, rightly or wrongly, because sometimes intentions are good, but they're not good enough if they're not applicable to our situation. So we should stop dealing with Africa, with our entire societies as they ought to be. We should deal with them as they really are in order to chart a common future. That's what my perspective is.
Thank you for that, Fumni. Before I leave you, just very briefly, you're already doing incredible work at the African Leadership Center. But how can you ensure that some of this work you are doing touches a little bit more, touches the grassroots in our various different regions?
Well, I have to say that because of the way in which these young leaders come to us, it's very rare that they're not from the grassroots of those regions. And not just that, we bring young Africans who have a sense of the change that they want to make in the area of peace and security. And we don't always get it right. Sometimes, things fall through the crack. They also have what they call forward-look projects that they take to their different communities, whether that community be at the grassroots or is at a national or regional level. But I think that, and I need to make that point, it's not just about the African Leadership Center, it's about such centers, and many of the leaders of such centers are sitting in this room, working collectively to mentor the next generation in the right direction. Okay. And I think it's beginning to gain ground somewhat.
Thank you very much. Francois, I come to you now for your perspectives, and of course, the crisis we're seeing in Central Africa, alongside other crises across the continent, it's breaking, it literally is breaking Africa's heart. And what that does is destroy the hope. Your struggles and your thoughts on this issue, please.
Thank you very much. Allow me first to congratulate the co-conveners for organizing this important forum. And thank you for inviting me. Much has been said by my distinguished panelists, co-panelists, about the factor that hinder the success of our efforts to foster sustained peace and security on the continent. A number of recommendations have been put forward on how we can attain that shared goal, especially in our rapidly changing global and continental context. I would like to complement these with a few additional points, focusing on the most challenging situation in the Central African region. First, let me highlight that no region in Africa is immune to the challenges to peace, security, and sustainable development. These challenges, violent conflict, extremism, terrorism, rising inequality, demographic change with pressure arising from a growing youth population and rising youth unemployment, gender inequality, illicit exploitation of natural resources, illicit financial flows, climate change, new technologies, and other global and continental trends are interconnected and have potentials to cause further instability within and across the region. Therefore, it's important to revitalize our effort toward enhancing regional cooperation and regional integration, tackling critical and interconnected peace, security, and development challenges. The new Continental Development Agenda 2063 underscores this point. However, its implementation will be key, and the sub-regional organizations have an important role to play, including in fostering interregional cooperation. Second, there is a need for greater focus on addressing structural causes, not just symptoms of conflict. Against the background of collapsing peace process and the relapse of violence that we witness in a number of countries in Central Africa region, today it's imperative to address the root causes of conflict, which are interlinked, grow in Central Africa. For instance, post-election dispute in Burundi, Congo, and Gabon remains a source of potential tension amidst a deepening economic crisis. This situation further underscores the importance of strengthening inclusive dialogue, mediation, and reconciliation capacities to better prevent and deal with electoral disputes. Ongoing social unrest in Cameroon Northwest and Southwest regions, tragedy with both protests related to corporate grievance expressed by lawyers and teachers, an accusation of discrimination against the Anglophone population, underlines the necessity to address urgently deficit in governance, including in relation to the question of exclusion, marginalization, and the protection of human rights and fundamental freedom. In Chad, recent strike action over the non-payment of salary arrears, the effect of declining oil prices, austerity measures, weaknesses in governance and regional security challenges arising from the activities of Boko Haram have collectively contributed to exacerbating the link between poverty, inequality, and vulnerability, especially for the youth, a number of whom are consequently seduced by violent extremists and terrorist groups. We see that frequently with Boko Haram activities. Renewed violence in the Central African Republic, well as the large of the activities in the Lord Resistance LRA army group in the Eastern region. The third point is fostering sustainable peace and security necessitated strong local ownership as just extensive and deliberated effort required to build and strengthen resilience capacities within and across government, civil society, and private sector. Ongoing efforts to invest in local infrastructure for peace and create open space for active engagement. The fourth point is investing in strong, accountable, and inclusive institutions at both national and regional level. And this we have many concerns in Central African region with the way how ICAS is managing its mediation structure. Lasting, sustainable funding is key to achieving our objective. We really cannot do much without the necessary resources. Again, drawing for Central Africa, I would like to mention that the new progress in developing an ECAS and security capacity is also a function of the lack of resources and commitment on the part of its member states. Therefore, to foster sustainable peace and security, member states need to actively invest in funding their own regional institutions. The continuous support of the international community will also be important for this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Sound institutional frameworks are absolutely critical. I'm avoiding having an academic discussion, so I'm going to come to you, President Obasanjo, with a very candid and human question. Just looking at the nature of conflicts in Africa, it's alarming. There are so many. You've taken us through that actually this morning. But let's use Libya as an example. Libya is fractured. The stories coming out of Libya now tell us of an area that is seeing, exploitation of people, enslavement of people. It's shocking, it's horrifying. And yet we watched as a continent Libya fall. When Libya falls, it affects the nations surrounding it, it affects the region. When you look at the African elders, and I come to you specifically with this because the question is, has Africa abandoned Libya? Has Africa abandoned South Sudan? A crisis that started with 2 stakeholders, that now is evolving into multiple stakeholders. I don't know how we start to solve South Sudan. But Your Excellency, seated here, and with this platform of elders that has been put together, what is the responsibility of these elders to say, enough is enough, we're not taking it anymore? Our borders will be secure. Foreign powers cannot come in and do what they like. And we will not allow our countries to fall. We take responsibility. Who is going to do this? And if it's not the African elders, what can we expect from others? And if the African elders decide to do it, how can others support a bold and brave effort to bring some sanity to the continent?
Well, I think you are right. African elders have their role to play, but it's more of African leaders, the incumbent leaders. And I will come to Libya and South Sudan. But the situation in Liberia that we are all hailing and enjoying today will not have been if some of us have not taken the bull by the horn at the time we did and said, we just, whatever it costs. And that's why I make allusion to it. I particularly mention the name of President Thabo Mbeki, President Chisano, and President Kufuor. Now, people have forgotten that Charles Taylor was legitimately elected. And he was legitimately elected. But we have seen, we saw that, yes, legitimately elected, but things were falling apart in his country. So the first thing we did, we encouraged the country to have dialogue, as my brother said, national dialogue in Ghana. It was hosted in Ghana. While that dialogue was going on, the dialogue came to the conclusion that the only way to get peace is for Charles Taylor to give way. Now, who will bail the cat? Now, Charles Taylor was legitimately elected. His term was not over. We got together. We decided to bail the cat. And we persuaded him. And President Thabo Mbeki, I have to point at you, he actually went to the lion's den and brought the lion out. I was sitting in Lagos, in Abuja, waiting for him, President Chisano, and President Kufuor. And the only thing is that when President Kufuor came back, used my presidential plane, he complained that there was no brandy in my plane. Now, but on a very serious note, we had to do that. And if we didn't do it, the worst that will have happened will be Charles Taylor going into the bush. And it will be, till today, he will have been fighting in the bush. Now, that we did. And I want to say this. I have never said it. Maybe my colleagues with whom I was in government at the same time will agree. I believe if African leaders had been more decisive, we will have got an African solution in Libya. I believe we will have got an African solution in Libya if it was the leadership that dealt with the case of Taylor that was still the leadership that we will have. Well, we didn't have that. I am very much worried about Libya. I am not as worried about South Sudan as I am about Libya. South Sudan, let me deal with South Sudan first. For the first time, African leaders stuck their neck out. There was something wrong in South Sudan, and they set up a commission of inquiry. The first time. I happen to be the chair of that commission of inquiry. We look at it, and we submitted a report. But our leaders who had the courage to set up a commission of inquiry, their courage deserted them to implement the report of the commission of inquiry. And for as long as that is the situation, I believe that the problem of South Sudan will not be solved. You see, at the moment you have another elder. President Kappa, where are you working? In Burundi. Okay. He is working in Burundi. President Muhai is working in South Sudan. President Thabo Mbeki has an unending job in Sudan and South Sudan and Darfur, Horn of Africa. Now, there's not much we can do as yeah. Now he is working in Libya. Yeah. Okay. There's not much we can do unless our leaders who are incumbent leaders now take the bull by the horn and do what they have to do. Now, there's not. And Libya, he can tell you about Libya. I am worried about Libya because the United Nations has supported a group, a government. Then you have a general supporting another side. Am I correct? Okay. Then there is the old Gaddafi group who are now completely being sidelined, being neglected, and they are alive and kicking. Nobody is talking to them. Nobody is talking to them. Now, then there are the issue of tribes in Libya. So even if the two groups that are now on Libyan soil, if you resolve them, you haven't resolved the third that are not substantially on Libyan soil. Then the tribes, you have to bring them together. Mm-hmm. And my worry is this. When ISIS leave Syria and leave Iraq and leave everywhere in the Middle East. The only place they may likely go now is Libya. And if they go to Libya, we will be, it will be unbearable for all of us, from West Africa across to Central Africa, up to Kenya, up to the north. I think it's only you here, President Thabo Mbeki, that you may
be safe,
yeah,
may be safe.
Maybe. Now,
yes.
and that is where, when you contemplate that, when you contemplate it, it is. I feel worried.
It is horrifying. It is horrifying. So let's continue to contemplate. We're talking about cementing foundations, and these are the issues that we have to deal with. Let me come to you, Your Excellency. And you know, the issue raised by President Obasanjo is that, look, it's got to be those in power now. It's got to be the leaders there now who take the kind of action that we took in Liberia. However, as you know, probably better than many others, as a former president, there are very many issues at hand. Their relationships, their interests, it can be very difficult. So how do they balance that, and how do you as elders perhaps play a role as well in filling what is clearly a gap?
Well, I would like to come back to the situation of Libya. I'm also very worried with what's happening, because it's our neighbors. So our security also depends on what's happening in Libya. And we tried during my presidency, we tried everything, with our Libyan brother. But the problem is that now there are many external actors, from Africa, intervening in the problem and doing all the best, to prevent any kind of solution. This is why I think we have an important role to play. I mean, respected African leaders. I think we have to do more, to go back to the field, and then to talk with the people and to do everything, because really it's a mess. It's a mess not only for Tunisia, not only for the North African part of the continent, but also for the central part, for the situation in Mali, in Niger, everywhere. This country depends on the outcome of what's happening in Libya. So it must be our priority.
Thank you so much. For me, you want to jump in, please do.
Yes, thank you very much. It's fascinating that we're having this conversation about Libya and South Sudan. And of course, let me make an observation, bearing in mind that I think I'm slightly less naive than I used to be as an academic, because if you take a country like South Sudan that emerged through extraordinary circumstances, and yet we framed exactly the same kind of peace that we will frame in other places in South Sudan. That is what is mind-boggling. That we had an African process, but yet, when I talked about external interventions earlier, is the ideological, dogmatic adherence to building a particular kind of state that I think was a challenge in South Sudan. During colonial times, at least in my own country, Nigeria, I remember how many constitutions we went through. Clifford Constitution, this, that, you're not ready to lead yourselves. Let's have another constitution with greater representation until we finally got independence after decades of trying to do that. Yet in South Sudan, we rushed to go through elections and we framed everything, the future and the destiny of the people of South Sudan around two individuals. And then we expected that they would acquiesce to all of the national conversations that would let them pursue a future with their people. I think that is the canker we're dealing with. And we need to really have a collective conversation as Africans as to how we will have new ideas for dealing with conflict and thinking outside the box for dealing with those issues.
Being innovative. Yeah. Honorable Nutumbo, please.
Yes.
Yes, there are now specific cases that are being referred to Libya and South Sudan, but I think it will also be just helpful if we can look into the situations that we are seeing in our continent. In the introductory statement, President Obasanjo talked about the sources of conflict when he referred to power struggle. I want also to add the issue of resources and greediness. Why I'm addressing this is because if you look at the conflict areas we have now, which are so prolonged, that is now South Sudan. You go to the other areas, Libya now has come in. You are really talking, you talk about DRC. You are talking about places where there are strategic natural resources. And until as Africa, I will keep going to the issue of a common denominator that we have. Until we have that, it will be difficult to have a decisive action, because when you talk, action becomes a challenge. And the question I always put is why these countries where there are strategic resources, we have such prolonged conflict. Who is benefiting?
Right.
Is it ourselves? Is it outside? Is it a mix? That is really a challenge that we have to face in order to solve these problems.
Thank you so much. And so let's not leave that thought. Who is benefiting? That's the challenge we have to face. What is the solution? Francois, let me come to you before I go to the floor now. Thank you.
Please switch to French now. I'll speak in French, please. It's a new exercise. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm quite happy to be with you here because this is a debate.
I'm sorry, but to be your French. Bien, je vous remercie.
Well, thank you very much for your kind attention. So I am humbled by the presence of this high-level, wise, eminent head of state. I mean President Obasanjo, who actually worked on a number of issues pertaining to the peace and security, mentioning Liberia case. I was also in the group which actually was part of the solution in Liberia. In Maputo, also at the AU summit, President Obasanjo has got a great wisdom in terms of democracy dialogue. But actually, the departure of Charles Taylor was also the democratic outcome of the negotiations which were actually in place because it was a question of putting to an end the war. And then the rebels were actually at a point where everybody wanted to actually move to a constitutional and legal framework to have peace in Liberia. So there was this wisdom of Kofi Annan, President Obasanjo, and high-level leaders who proposed that Charles Taylor could, at the end of his term, actually step down. And then the troops were sent to Liberia, and then Charles Taylor actually left, and that was a kind of a conflict management style, which actually, if it was used prior to even that case, a lot of things could have been sorted. But in the case of South Sudan, well, up to last year, actually, envoys were actually sent to bring about a lot of sort of efforts, especially by IGAD. But when we actually got to South Sudan, we did realize that in spite of IGAD's effort, there were a lot of dimensional issues, and the experience that we got in West Africa in general were difficult to be transferred into that part because whether the Sierra Leone, the Guinea-Bissau, or the Liberia case could be transferred. We could not replicate it in such a way because what was the deficit in South Sudan case was that the IGAD made a peace plan. And then we actually tried to implement it. But when the return of Machar happened, well, Machar was able to come in with his troops, which was a kind of a threat to peace because this could not sustain the peace initiative which was actually mentioned. So certainly we wouldn't have been here today. But I would like to actually praise IGAD for the effort and also the African leaders because as an African, I would say that all the conflicts which were sorted in Africa were African solutions to those African problems. So I would say that, for instance, I worked in Somalia, and then when I got to Somalia in 2005, then I would say that the Secretary General was in Nairobi. We worked within that region, and then this is a key example where IGAD once more was involved very successfully in sorting out this conflict. So in Mogadishu, but the AU actually invested all the efforts necessary to actually find a solution. Now, turning to the early warning system under the AU, which is one of the units that functions very well, but the early warning, as we know, actually gives a kind of signal to conflicts which are going to stem. But sometimes, even when you prevent, you cannot stop it, so to speak. So it was explained to us that sometimes the escalation comes for so many reasons. Then the northern part of Africa, the central part of Africa, for instance, in spite of the early warning system, there is a conflagration at the time that cannot be contained. So that is why prevention sometimes can be more difficult. So ECOWAS mediation system was there also. And then when you compare, for instance, the progress made and the gap between the ECAS countries and the ECOWAS countries, it is quite important. So the AU Commission should rather put an emphasis on the priority areas because all the regions of Africa do not follow the same pace in terms of conflict sorting mechanism. So there must be more efforts to be made, more coordination, and more capacity building at the level of the regional blocks in terms of solving these conflict areas. So dialogue, internal dialogue, national dialogue, consultations, the case of Burundi, all these could be coordinated in such a way, taking cognizance of the pace. Because today, for instance, in Burundi, it's a very important situation because it's not only peace, it's justice. So it is peace and justice. So it is something like a component of two different elements which have to be taken into consideration. So we are trying now to see how the international community and AU would actually bring about peace in Burundi. And then that is why with the help of the UN, we'll be able to actually try to solve so many problems linked to peace and justice. Because peace and security could also go along on the basis of justice. So when you have peace, justice will follow, and justice will actually be the cement. So we have to take cognizance of that in terms of conflict management. So these are like a kind of background upon which we could render a vibrant thanks and appreciation to all the wise leaders of the African Union. And thank you for this meeting.
Thank you for that. Very instructive on just how complex the problem is and the role that you see the AU having. I'm coming to the floor now, if you'll excuse me, Mr. President, as I try to get past. I do want your questions, but first and foremost, I'm going to come to our former heads of state because I don't want to leave the discussion I've started on the role that the elders have, and you are already playing a role. But how do you do better in the role that you play? President Muluzi, let me start with you, please. You've heard the discussions. What's your role? What's the role of the elders? How do we support you? How do we support the AU?
Thank you very much indeed. First of all, thank you, President Mbeke and the colleagues who are here for this meeting. I thought before you gave me, I was looking at former president of Tanzania to hear about Libya, yeah, because that's yeah.
We can start there. Yes.
Well, one thing is, the first thing I would say is, when the conflict in Libya broke out, African leaders were the first to take action. They formed a committee of 5 heads of state. I think South Africa was among them, Uganda was among them, Mauritania, we had Congo, and another country which has escaped me. Mali? Mali. This committee went to Libya. They had meetings in Tripoli, they had meetings in Benghazi, they had meetings with Gaddafi, trying to convince him that it is time that he should think of stepping aside. They went to Benghazi, they met the leaders of the rebellion. They said to them, the bottom line is for Gaddafi to leave. Then the leaders left. But then there was the Security Council resolution. The responsibility to protect. Create a no-fly zone. I remember we were, last time I was still president, we were in Mauritania discussing the issue of Cote d'Ivoire. But after our meeting on Cote d'Ivoire, the leaders were going to go to Libya. And then an official from the French embassy came to tell President of Mauritania, don't go. Just as simple as that. And the bombing started. So President Zuma took the courage of trying to go to Libya. I think because South Africa is powerful. It's not like other small countries we have. Yeah, we must admit it. The voice of South Africa is not like the voice of Tanzania. It's a statement of fact. Then I think they were able to talk to the powers there. They stopped the bombing for some time. They allowed President Zuma to go to Libya. He met the leader. Immediately after he left, they bombed the place where he met the leader. And then that was the end of the African initiative. Then it was just the bombing, until the leader was killed. Their mission was accomplished, they left. They left the country in the hands of nobody.
But someone is benefiting.
Huh?
Ladies and gentlemen, somebody is benefiting.
No, I'm saying, look, let me tell you the Libyan story, because you want to grasp it. It was left in the hands of nobody. Then there was the National Transition Council. For some time, they tried and made an attempt of a parliament. It didn't work out. And then what happened? The Islamists, who were better organized, took over. And then it became now untenable to them that if Gaddafi has left, and we left the country in the hands of the Islamists, it's not possible. Then they supported the others now to oust the Islamists. And this is the conflict that has been going on and on and on. Okay, later, of course, and then, of course, you had the UN initiative, the Secret Agreement that created the Government of National Accord, We have now the new Prime Minister, we have a government of national accord. But in the meantime, another movement has been created under the leadership of Field Marshal Khalifa Haftar. Is that? He calls himself a Field Marshal. If you call him less, he will not accept you. So he's Marshal now. You talk to the Marshal. So you have this kind of situation now. There is almost a standoff. You have a Marshal. You have the government in Tripoli now under Fayez Sarraj, supported, of course, recognized by the UN, international. Then you have in the east, Marshal Haftar in charge. African Union has created a committee. They appointed me the High Representative. Well, whatever that means. But then, when I was appointed High Representative, the biggest problem I had is that Africa had lost the initiative on Libya. So you have to go through the existing initiative. Now we went through a process, we came to a certain point. Then you have Macron calling the two leaders in Paris. They agree for an election next year. So, you know, there's so much complication there. I don't know where we'll get there. But of course, we're meeting again on the 9th of September. We're still on it. We say Africa has to continue to be on the Libyan agenda.
Thank you so much. So listening to the Libya story, and this is the problem, is that we are here as Africans to talk about cementing foundations for peace and security, for sustained peace and security in Africa. However, we've just been told we have no control over our sustained peace and security in Africa, because if external players decide to come in and bomb, they'll come in and bomb and warn you not to go there because you'll get bombed. Or they'll follow you going there for a meeting and then bomb as soon as you leave. Lack of respect. But then even in Africa's response to these things, have we failed ourselves? Yeah, those saying yes, please put up your hands. Have we failed ourselves that people can come in and do what it is that they want because we don't have the systems, the institutions, the structures? President Mbeki, I come to you now. President Jakaya Kikwete told us whatever that means. He's been given a title. Whatever that means. And therein is the problem. Maybe it's time for us to say, this is exactly what that means. And it doesn't just take South Africa to stand up. Tanzania can say enough is enough. Yes? Any African country is country enough to say enough. How do we start this, please, President Mbeki? What next? How do we take control of the peace and security on our own continent?
No, Madam Moderator, what I wanted to say on this Libyan thing, the point that was raised by President Obasanjo earlier, there were 3 African member states of the Security Council at the point when that resolution 1973 was adopted. It was South Africa, it was Nigeria, and Gabon. And all of them voted for that resolution. If they hadn't, that resolution would not have passed.
Why did they vote for it?
I don't know, you must ask them. Because you see, it's quite obvious. It's quite obvious that those ambassadors of ours in New York would have consulted Capital with regard to that resolution. And it's Capital which said to them, vote for it. Africans. I'm saying if those 3 hadn't done that, that resolution would have failed.
So we already have a problem in terms of a common voice, a common agenda for Africa, and how to deal with.
But it's the issue he raised earlier about what has happened. What has happened in terms of the African leadership? And maybe he should answer that question, President Obasanjo.
No, I will.
Good.
You see, look, we are just dancing around the thing. Look, the way we operated. Now, I think I have no shame in saying this. Those times, anytime there is an issue like that, I will get onto my plane, I will go to President Thabo Mbeki, I will go to President Bouteflika. Now, President Thabo Mbeki will have his own area. We have about 4 or 5 people. Whatever those 3 of us agree, President Benjamin Mkapa will go along with us. President Muhai will go along with us. The Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Meles, will go. We have about a dozen of us will go together. And if a dozen of us, Nigeria, Algeria, South Africa, Tanzania, Botswana, we will get Ghana at that time, if you remember. We will get about, and then we will, how can you have 3 African countries in the Security Council and vote for something that is not supported by Africa? And Nigeria is there, South Africa is there. Now, so that was what I was saying about leadership. Now, I sympathize with President Kikwete. Mm-hmm. He's trying to say what happened. But what happened is that they did not put their act together. Let's call a spade a spade.
They is weak.
They did not put.
President Kikwete's team.
I was talking of the African leaders at the time when the.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
When who went to Obama? Did any of us go to Obama? We would have gone to Obama and tell Obama to his face. Now, Obama was shedding crocodile tears the other day.
Yes, he said it was his biggest mistake.
Shedding crocodile tears when you have given us a mess?
President Obasanjo, can I mention that?
Mention whatever you want to mention, my dear sister.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. That President Clinton said the biggest mistake of his tenure was not acting on Rwanda and the decisions they made at the Security Council on Rwanda. 1 million people dead in the span of a few months, right? President Barack Obama says the biggest mistake he made was in Libya. Total disaster now. So Africa is almost this battleground where it's okay to make mistakes and then, feel bad about it afterwards. But for us, it's loss of life. It is destabilization. It is destruction. I'm going to ask again, what then, as we sit here with the elders, are the systems that we need to put in place to ensure that Africa has control over her continent? President Mkapa.
I'm sorry, it may sound very arrogant, but the leadership is disorganized, the leadership lacks courage, and they don't have the guts even to defend their own national interest, let alone the continental one.
Wow. They lack courage, they don't have the guts, they can't even defend their own national interest, and we're here talking about continental interest.
And they don't work together.
And they don't work together. I will ask again, that's the leadership that we have. Ladies and gentlemen, we have them. They are our leaders. We are in this room as stakeholders and as elders. I'm coming to the floor now. I see the hands. Would any of the other presidents please like to? Yes, thank you.
Yes, I think I'll take from what my brother, former president of Tanzania has said.
Order, please, ladies and gentlemen.
It is very, very important that the African Union has to take a decisive measure on Libya. We cannot keep on talking. I mean, of course, President Kikwete is going there. What can you do? Apart from taking a plane, goes there, discuss and all that. I think we need more than that. The African Union has to take a decision on this issue. We know the problem in Libya is to do with the oil there. You know, the leaders are fighting, you know, for the wealth which is there, and they will not just give you up like that. There has to be some action of some kind. And I would propose that something has to be done by the African Union militarily to go there in Libya.
Thank you. President Hassan, very quickly.
I think for Libya, yes, I do agree. It's too late. Maybe some of the action is too late to take. Now, yes, what has been said by President Nkaba and President Obasanjo is absolutely true. Lack of being coordinated, lack of all these qualities that have been mentioned to African leaders are there. But on the other side is what happened to those African leaders who resisted and who refused when these big bosses say something. And then what Africa has done to defend the position of those leaders who said no. To say no, there are certain consequences that follows. So what's important here is we need to work together at the African Union to make the African Union a voice that can collectively decide or that can collectively bargain in the international arena, like the United Nations Security Council, members of the African Union in the UN Security Council. Do they represent their own countries only, or do they represent the continental Africa? So these are some of the issues that needs to be discussed, and I think the focus has to be back again to the African Union and what it stands for.
Thank you for that, but I'll still keep coming back to who then is going to pressure the African Union to do better. What role do you have to play? Yes.
Well, about Libya, I would like to remind you that Libya is, of course, an African country, but it's also an Arab country, and it's also a Mediterranean country. That means that, in fact, you have a lot of players working to defend their own interests. So, for instance, you do know probably that General Haftar is the man of the Emirates, and that he's playing a huge role, you know, as somebody who has to, you know, to stop the wave of the Arab Revolution. Of course, the Italian, the French, the Spanish are extremely interested in what's happening in Libya because they're afraid of the immigration. I think we, of course, as African, we have to intervene, but we must understand that in cases like Libya, specifically like Libya, you have other partners, and we have to work with them. If we want to find a solution to Libya, I'm quite sure that we cannot do it just as African leaders. We have to work to talk to the other partners, European partners, Mediterranean partners, and the Arab partners. Otherwise, the problem wouldn't solve. I'm afraid that it's the same thing everywhere. So, of course, we have to intervene, you have to be present, but we have also to take this problem in account.
Well, I believe what
very briefly, Mr. President, then we'll hear your question. I'll come to the audience.
What the President has just said is the problem of Libya. Libya is an Arab country. The Arabs are not united on the issue of Libya. It's an African country. It's a Mediterranean country. The Mediterraneans are not united on the issue of Libya. So, and then, as President Kikwete has rightly said, it's now completely out of the hands of Africa. So to ask African Union to take on the job of dealing with the problem of Libya is asking African Union to do the impossible.
Okay, yes, very quickly.
Mine is only a question on this issue of leaders not working together. I think President Obasanjo said something to that effect. But why is it that our leaders are able to work together in the pursuit of their own interest, their own group interest, but not in pursuit of the collective interest of the people? ICC, we supported when we said an African voice, but no internal justice in the countries. And yet, we were quick to have a collective position on ICC. I think that kind of division that kind of double standard is precisely why we're not moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, noted. And I'm going to start with the questions. There are two ladies on that end, and I'll come this way across the room. Please introduce yourself, make your comment, ask your question, but also if you are doing something, tell us about it. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Excellencies and our distinguished colleagues in the room, thank you for allowing us to be here in the space. My name is Gwendolyn Myers, and I'm a global youth peace and security advocate. I'm a global shepherd of the Global Shepherds community of the World Economic Forum. I mean, having listened to all of the conversation on this whole issue of peace and security, I really want to bring our attention to a generation that is usually underestimated, and a generation, when I say underestimated, but most of the times used to foment violence and conflict in any conflict setting, in any conflict zone, and that has to do with young people on the continent. I mean, talking about sustaining peace and security, we cannot find amicable solution to sustaining peace and security on the continent without investing in the young people on the continent. And when I talk about investing in the young people on the continent, it brings me to this newly adopted Security Council Resolution 2250 that is on youth peace and security. And that resolution is looking at 5 key pillars in terms of protection of young people from armed conflict. We look at the active participation of young people. We also look at how do we partner with young people to get them meaningfully engaged. And then the issue of what disintegration and reintegration. But again, I really want to encourage all of us going back to our local communities, because all this conversation is meaningless if it's not having any root in the local communities. How do we build the capacity of young people on the continent? There is nothing wrong with having young people to be part of mediation team. There is nothing wrong at negotiation table to have young people voices to be adequately represented and part of this lead delegation that is going to build peace around the continent. Nothing is wrong with it. Because at the end of the day, it is the same young people who will be used. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Wow. To the lady behind you, please. Thank you. Yes.
Oh, thank you very much. My name is Mujangu Gumbi. I'm a retired lawyer, South African. Let me just say that I think the conclusion that I've come to is that there is no way that outsiders can take you seriously if you don't take yourself seriously. I think that, first of all, I think most of our leaders currently honestly don't take themselves seriously. You look at what President Lungu is doing, you know, it just baffles the mind. You look at Zambia, you look at President Paul Biya, what he's doing baffles the mind. They don't take themselves seriously. And then secondly, they really treat us with contempt. Us, you know, their subjects with contempt. And I can go on and on about that. I think that the solution is to reverse the demobilization of our people. You know, with the Pan-Africanist program succeeding, most of our people were demobilized. Now we've got, you know, Africa is free, finally South Africa is free and all that. So we stepped back from owning our own freedom and taking responsibility for our own countries. And the one good example that I picked up, you mentioned Kenya. You know, after the attack at the University of Garissa, the young people started a movement to say, we will act against, you know, extremism and radicalism. And they work on campuses across the board. That's the only way that we are going to solve this problem.
Absolutely.
We have to re-mobilize at the community level.
Thank you.
And all of that.
Very powerful. Thank you for that. Gentleman over here, please. Thank you.
My name is Amin Pungo. I'm retired diplomat. Almost made a career out of dealing with conflict. So what has been said here, the issue of conflict resolution in Africa has been dealt with for a very long time, and yet we're not getting anywhere. So I'll pick up from where President Mkapa left, and I think the young lady also pointed out that the leadership capacity internally. And here we have been told that all the retired presidents are dealing with conflicts in different parts of of Africa except in their own countries. So, in the first instance, I think having, strong leadership within the countries, local statesmen and stateswomen who can intervene whenever there are problems within these countries. I think that's the first starting point. Before going to other countries, I think we also have to address our own internal issues and have leadership that can stand up and, even criticize their former parties that they used to lead, where they are going wrong in terms of peace and stability.
Right.
Secondly, I think the young lady also made it very strongly. In the light of the new challenges that we're facing, we need different skill sets of leadership. During struggles for independence and liberation, we had people, mobilizers, preachers, trade unionists, mobilizers. But now we're dealing with management of resources and markets. I think we need a new type of, new generation of leadership that can handle the challenges of our time.
Moving from the struggle for independence and freedom to now the struggle for development.
Yeah, that the Deputy Prime Minister of Namibia so eloquently put across. And thirdly, on a more sustainable basis, I grew up in Tanzania. We started as multi-party, then one-party system, and then multi-party. You may criticize the one-party system that we had, but criticize it for everything, but at least we came out as very strong, united country across tribal and religious, whatever.
Right.
Now we ask the question, the multi-party systems that we inherited, are they really working? Because in some countries we see former colleagues during one-party state or during struggles, and then when the multi-party comes, they're bitter enemies. So must we continue with this system of winner takes all? One winning 51, 60, 70, 80%, and taking 100% of the power.
Hard questions.
Can't we have governments of national unity like what South Africa adopted? We had that in Zanzibar, and there was a lot of peace and stability when we had government of national unity. So must we stick to this system?
Thank you so much. Thank you. And a valid discussion to be pursued. Let's come to this side, please, with a mic. Oh, you've got one. Thank you. Go ahead. Yes, we're coming. We're coming. We're coming.
No, thank you. And thank you for the discussion. One of the, I suppose, the key question as a generation of leaders that are coming through Africa is to answer the fundamental question as to whether can you have democracy without Democrats. And this is a fundamental issue of leadership.
Can you have democracy without Democrats?
Because we appoint leaders who their ascension to power is often a competition of resources and an access to resource rather than the strengthening of institutional power in terms of democracy.
Right.
The second question and the point I want to make is that President Obasanjo correctly points out that a poor person cannot claim peace and stability.
A hungry man.
A hungry man can't. And therefore, the fundamental question is that when it comes to issues of inter-regional trade in Africa, those have taken a back door. And so the natural effect of that means that how is it that Nigerians are consuming less South African wine as a question than they would elsewhere? And I'm proposing that perhaps maybe it's critical that Africa creates effective regional trading blocks that can be able to negotiate on trade deals that affect the region in its entirety.
And when you're intertwined, your interests
Correct.
are, yes.
Because now suddenly a businessman that comes from another country is not seen to me as a question of migration, but we have a common interest as Africans to address African issues. And then the third point I want to ask is this issue of accountability, because I think that has fallen by the wayside. We discuss very often this issue of, the SADC tribunal was set up here to hold leaders accountable and was disbanded. So what happens when people act beyond democratic means? And why is it that we've had a failure of leadership that seeks to hold those leaders to account when they act beyond their constitutions, beyond their mandates, and fail the bipartisan task of uniting the nation rather than pursuing interests and advancing their own almost ethnic groups. So I support the proposal that President Obasanjo makes of a council of elders that can guide this discussion. But I would also propose that we must set up something similar, a bit like to ASEAN in the East, that focuses on trade, that says in regions in Africa, how do we set up trading blocks so that we can advance economic development? For failure to do that, we'll have missed objectives.
Thank you. Please pass to the gentleman at the back. Can we have a mic here? Where is the other mic?
My name is Abdullah Jane. I'm a former Under-Secretary General of the United Nations. I now head the Africa Governance Institute. I also work for the Mo Ibrahim Foundation as a group director. When I listen to President Obasanjo and all the others, the biggest challenge to peace and security are conflicts. And conflicts in Africa, in most cases, are national in order, in nature. You know, it's a breakdown of law and order, it's the promotion of corruption. There are many reasons why conflict erupt in countries. But I'm convinced now, listening to him, that to deal with these nationally created conflicts cannot be done within the borders of the countries. It must go beyond. And therefore, we should find a way of saying who is responsible, how do we apportion responsibility. And what I'm putting on the floor is that it is the backyard of the country which is in conflict that should take the primary role. And if you look at African history, we saw
the regional players.
The regional players must take
Mbeki is saying no, but we'll come to that in a moment.
I always support him, but let me go here. We will not have solved Liberia, not the exit of Charles Taylor, but Liberia, getting the peace in Liberia without the region. We would not have done the same in Sierra Leone. We would not have a peace in Lesotho.
In Gambia.
In Gambia. So, it is the regional blocks. What we want is African Union should give legitimacy to these regional institutions. We should strengthen these regional institutions. They should have the capacity where there is early warning system for them to have the guts to go into a country and stop it. But once it's there, it is the regional blocks. And I think this meeting should emphasize the role of the regional and the need to give them resources to be able to pull this role.
The mic is just behind. President Mbeki, I'll come to you in a few minutes to tell us why you disagree. Go ahead, Raphael.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I'm called Raphael Obonyo. I'm from Kenya, but I'm also a youth representative at the United Nations. 3 things. One is the issue of inequality. It is said that the rich man can't sleep because the poor man is awake and the poor man is hungry. For as long as we fail to address the question of inequality, the narrative of Africa rising and Africans are not rising, we will continue facing conflict. So we must ensure equal distribution of resources. The second thing, and which other speakers have alluded to, is the issue of youth. If you want to know the stability of any community, any society, look at the position and the condition of youth. In this continent, 60% of jobless people are actually young people. You do not expect peace and security in a situation where we have jobless young people. Third is the question of leadership. We have a crisis of leadership in this continent. Many years after people like Nyerere left, many years after Nelson Mandela left, many years after such great leaders left, we are still quoting them in terms of positive example. Across this continent, young people like myself are looking for positive example. Leaders who base their leadership on vision, on values, on courage, on servant leadership. It is extremely important. So as we discuss, I think we must also look at those 3 points.
Thank you so much. Lady right now. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Zanele Mazibugo, and I'm a Timali alumni. My question is very basic. I need to ask the House, what happened to the concept of African Renaissance? The reason I'm asking that is because the concept of African Renaissance was to address the question of who we are as Africans, where we come from, and perhaps guide us or give us tools of where we can go or how we can identify our solutions as African. As the Honorable Obasanjo said, that if we are African, we should identify our own solution to sort out our own problems. So I'm standing here very concerned. I'm a young African woman concerned that if as African we could not sustain the concept of African Renaissance, which is a basic issue of who we are as African, how are we going to solve the problems of peace, security, leadership, power, and all? That's my question. Thank you very much.
Wow, okay. Gentleman at the back in the striped suit, please. His hand is up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the panelists. My name is Professor Tim Murithi, Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, Cape Town. I think there's a small elephant in the room that we're failing to grapple with, which is the issue of incumbent presidents who have outlived their best before date, essentially. President Obasanjo said it, the biggest challenge is the failure to grab the bull by the horns. And I think we need to deal with this elephant in the room. We see these former presidents here, they seem quite healthy, quite happy, so there is life after presidency. Concretely, what can the former heads of state do to help us, to encourage those leaders who've overstayed their term of office? Beyond 10 years is too long. 25 years is, and 35 years is ridiculous. Concretely, what can we do? It seems like we can have a program of sorts to encourage these so-called leaders to in fact leave their position so that the citizens of Africa can live in peace. Thank you.
Thank you for that. This is why I keep coming to role of elders, a respected institution that the continent can look to and giving relevance to those leaders so they feel there is life after and they go on to do more. Gentleman over here, then I'm coming to this end. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellencies. My name is Wilson Kajrenje. I work as Director of Peace and Security for the ICGLR, International Conference on the Great Lakes region. I'm pleased to be here. However, I'm intrigued a bit. There isn't probably anything, and I'm sorry to say, there isn't probably anything new that we are saying that has not been said. The only difference is that these distinguished excellencies are actually saying it when they are out of power. And the challenge is, even when our leaders are in power, they make these commitments and promises, but they never commit, they never respect the commitments. Why are we losing the battle on Libya? Libya is part of Africa. It's an African continent. We have capacity to respond. We have capacity in everything, but why are we losing that? Regionally come here, why do we have conflict in country X and country Y to the extent of an outside power to dictate, to first listen whether America is saying this or UK is saying this? We have our local capacities to do that, but we don't actually do that. Now, having said that, question Professor Funmi. Madam Professor, you said, and it actually worked my mind, war-making state instead of a peacemaking state. Interesting. By nature of a state, looks like, can we actually, is it practical that we can have a peacemaking state? Because by orientation, by posture, a state supposed to hold power to defend itself and defend the people. So I want her to help me, and probably many others,
to understand if we can have a peacemaking state.
Is it practical that we can actually have a peacemaking state?
Thank you. I have to say that some of the leaders here have told us what they did. And in some instances, they did stick their necks out. But what we are saying is, where are the others? Where are the ones who are going to, absolutely. Let me come over here. I see you at the back. I'll come back there in a moment. Yes, I see the different hands. Can we make it as brief as possible so we can take as many questions? Thank you so much.
I will try. Cristina Duarte, former Minister of Finance and Planning, Cabo Verde Islands, and now I just joined the Uongozi Institute team. Let me start with the story about just that being told by former President of Tanzania. A French official just entered a room, say stop, and a high-level team of African leaders just undo a maybe high-level mission to Libya. Let's stop and think about this small story. I think this is an indicator that they perceive us as having lack of ownership. And this is true. Now I'm not going to talk as a former minister, but as an African citizen. There is lack of ownership in Africa. The feeling that I have that we do not own nothing. Let's ask, do we own our financial resources? Let's say our natural resources? No. Natural resource management in Africa is submitted to mispricing, rent-seeking, and we lose billions of dollars per year. Actually, we lose billions of dollars in a footnote of a contract in terms of natural resource management. Do we own our fiscal resources? No. We lose every year $50 billion in illicit flows. At the same time, we wait 3, 4, 5 years to get the same amount to finance infrastructure in Africa, which is a paradox. It seems that we wait for our own money. Do we own our financial resources? No. Our financial reserves, all of them, are overseas. Pension funds, international reserves. So there is a lack of ownership. And I believe that this lack of ownership is avoiding Africa to break the business as usual. I believe that most of the African policymakers are so concentrated in managing poverty in a rich continent. This is a paradox. So we need to change our ship. And in order to be able to shift from managing poverty, but to manage Africa as a continent with so many resources, in order to do that, we need to take ownership. And I would like to stress what one of the panelists just told us. But in order to take ownership, we need leadership. And I think we need leadership as a development tool, not as a goal by itself. Leadership needs to be exercised. It's not a function. It's not a position.
It is service. It is service delivery. It is service, yes.
To be a leader, I think, is different than exercise leadership. If a leader does not exercise leadership, which happened in Africa, at least he might be a bad boss. At least he might be a bad boss. So you have lack of ownership that is rooted on lack of leadership. And this lack of leadership just produce weak institutions.
Yes, thank you.
And weak institutions will never have peace and security in Africa, never. So it's time for African policymakers to start paying attention, not only to the physical infrastructure of Africa, roads, bridges, airports, but also to the institutional infrastructure in Africa.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, institutional do matter.
Thank you. Thank you. Very powerful. Thank you for that. We'll come to the gentleman at the front and then the lady. Thank you. Right here.
Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Babafemi Badejo. In terms of background, I had spent some 16 years teaching political science at the University of Lagos before spending 24 with the United Nations short of 2 months, in which I was directly in the field on conflicts. Somalia, I spent 13 years of my life, 2 inside Mogadishu, 11 in Nairobi on Mogadishu, as well as Liberia and Guinea-Bissau and Darfur, where I knew President Mbeki very closely. My quick contribution is that we have focused, rightly so, on the problem from the north. Now, that problem is definitely there. I was in Guinea-Bissau when Ramos Horta was appointed Special Representative of the Secretary General. He knew very well because he was coming from his own country, Timor-Leste, where the same experience had taken place, and he decided we need to address the constitutional problem in Guinea-Bissau. We must change that constitution by having the people have a dialogue and not continue with what it was. ECOWAS agreed with him. He went to President Jonathan, who took him along to ECOWAS meeting, and ECOWAS overwhelmingly took that position, but that position was thwarted by Portugal, supported by the European Union in the Security Council. ECOWAS could not hold the day at the end of the day. Now, a lot of examples have been given. President Obasanjo going there was because of that constitutional problem. It was after they forced us into restore constitutional order, election. The election took place. You had the Prime Minister and the President deadlocking themselves on the basis of the Constitution, and the country was at a standstill. Now, it could have taken just a few more months to have a dialogue, to have that. But then, that is talking about the problem from the north. But what about the problem amongst ourselves, which we are very, very silent about? Neighbors destabilize neighbors effectively. And they even now appoint those who are destabilizing, in some cases, from the African Union to go and solve the problem. They all pretend that they are not aware. Of course, somebody spoke about former president speaking boldly, and I will use President Moi to illustrate what I'm saying. After Moi had left office, he gave a speech in Washington to the military where he said, as far as he was concerned, and Ethiopia, Somalia cannot be back on his feet because it will destabilize them again the way it had done in the past. And then Meles was asked, is what Moi said true? Meles said, Moi is no longer president of Kenya, so he cannot even be talking for Kenya, and he cannot talk for Ethiopia. That was his response. Now, the Council of Elders, we do need it, as President Obasanjo said, but it must have courage, as President Nkapa said, to be able to say these things, even if they are not going to be able to move the process forward, to say it to the world that this is wrong. A neighbor should not destabilize a neighbor and get away with it. By the time it's repeated several times, it may...
We need a bold, courageous Council of Elders who do what needs to be done. I'm going to ask each of the following speakers, please do 30 seconds, and then we'll go back to the panel. Thank you. I see you.
That was always my intention. When I think about Africa, we are a continent of over 1.2 billion people who do want peace, stability, prosperity, justice, and security. And so, as a person who works for an organization that is working to support those things, a peaceful, prosperous Africa, the Institute for Security Studies, and I'm Otilia Anamaonganize, my question is simple. How do we move away from centering accountability, responsibility, and action on a few leaders and make it about those 1.2 billion people?
Wow, very powerful, very good. Please pass it back. I'll take two more. So gentlemen here and one of the gentlemen at the back. Thank you.
My name is Jean-Paul Mugiraneza. I work for Interpeace. I have two questions and also suggestion. One, President Obasanjo says the biggest issue that hinders peace stands with political disagreement. I like the statement, but at the same time, there is something called election in Africa that always results with conflict. There is something wrong there. Either the system is not working, either the democratic system we imported from the independence does not work. We definitely need, I liked a statement made by a person there, I can't remember the name. Does we really need to steal on one voice, one vote, and the winner takes all? We can save half of our problem if we resolve that. And most importantly, to say no to people who want us to put their trousers that are not fitting us.
Thank you, thank you. One of the gentlemen at the back, thank you.
My name is Victor Azure. I'm one of the winners of the Ongozi Leadership Essay Competition, and I'm a law student.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I think this point has also been captured, that post-independence, the moral clarity for the demand of independence and the practical imperatives thereof, that the colonial master must hand over power, waned after independence was gained. So after independence, matching scarce resources with very serious demands, countries began to look inward. And so we've lost the momentum that Africa had fighting for independence. How do we get that momentum back? I think about it as an African, a young person in Africa, that how come that there's, for example, there's no radio station in Africa that broadcasts from everywhere, that we can grow up listening and learning about the whole continent, and caring about the issues that can build the momentum for us to one day emerge as leaders and things alike.
So we haven't necessarily talked that much about it, but mindset change for the upcoming generations is absolutely critical. Please, yes.
Thank you very much.
30 seconds, literally.
My name is Khotso, and I'm an Ungozi is finalist. I want to concur with Obasanjo, President Obasanjo, that Africans, we don't honor the process. We are not masters of our own destiny. If you look at events in America, recent elections in America, recent elections in the Netherlands, recent elections in France, the message is clear that Europe for Europeans. Therefore, we must also say Africa for Africans. Let's own the process. The reason why you have been making noise that you want to be included in the United Nations Security Council and they have not allowed you to do that is because you're not supposed to be part and parcel of the decision making that is going to undermine Africa. Therefore, we as Africans must own this process. Own the process and own the solutions. African solutions to African problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Final word from a lady here, and I go back to the panel. Please, as brief as possible, my dear.
Thank you very much. The starting point of President Obasanjo about conflict having started in the Bible.
Are you going to be able to do this in a minute? I'm kidding.
This is where I wish to apologize. My name is Vincent. I'm the Foreign Minister for Botswana. I'll try and be very brief. I'll try and do this 3 minutes. Max? I'll make it 2. The thing that breaks peace has got so many things that we have to worry about. And if we're talking about peace, I don't know how I'm going to do it in 2 minutes, but I'll do my best. First, let's look at the structures. Because we are trying to manage society, and we are putting this in the hands of one person whom we don't know, selected or elected by thousands of people in whom they entrust their lives, their peace, their rights, their economies, everything, including the future of their children. And that person has to be trusted. Now, we have to worry about the structures that they're dealing with. We are Africans. Generally, way back, let me just do a quick throwback. We are used to having chiefs, traditional chiefs. Some of them want to think they are the chief. Some of us who voted them expect them to act like the chief. That's another piece of history, which I hope the director of the institute may have to worry about in her basket of things to worry about in this thing that we must deal with in leadership. Are we dealing with that at any point when we deal with our leaders? It may have to be educated out of our leadership frame as a feature. South Africa is a very good example of what we did with traditional leadership to build it out of. Because when you deal with Republican leadership, it's got nothing to do with traditional leadership. You are leading people of a myriad of expectations, a myriad of tribes and religions who don't care what tribe you belong to, and they have rights that you are going to have to respect. That's just one point. So allow me, I'll quickly go to the next one. You are trusted with their resources, their economies, to put bread on their plate. And they trust you with their wildlife, with their minerals, with their water, with everything that the country has. And you must share it equally and equitably. Their justice system to administer it fairly and transparently. The structures, that is the second thing. What are you going to put into place to make sure that everybody knows you are doing it properly? Now, if you have done a system that is transparent and people know that you are doing it properly, maybe you have a chance at peace. The last point is elections and democracy. Could somebody tell Raila Odinga a no is no? For instance, when people say no, they don't hate you. Today they want this one. They only chose this one for today. So maybe politicians have to be taught that there are two answers in an election. There's a yes and a no. Maybe the Leadership Center should go into another exercise of training elections who run for leadership. That at the end of an election, you can either have a yes vote or a no vote. And a no vote means get out of State House. Thank you.
Wow, okay. Thank you for that. We're coming to the end of the panel, and I want to come back to the panelists. We've had incredible views shared from the floor, but I want us to leave with a parting shot. You started us off with your perspectives. What is the parting shot that we must leave with when it comes to cementing the foundations? And we understand now we've always understood, it's complex, it's dynamic, it's multifaceted. What is your parting shot on this issue, cementing foundations for peace and security? Francois, I'll begin with you at the end.
Thank you very much. I want to conclude by saying that we need to underscore the need to reinforce the conflict prevention and early warning architecture in order to sustain peace and security in Africa. As I was saying, Central Africa region is a very interesting study case. This is a region where there's a lot of wealth, oil, a lot of possibility for agriculture, but the lack of, let's say, alternance, democratic alternance, the weak regional organization, and facing to many challenges. And, most of the leaders in Central Africa region are keeping the office for very long term, sometimes 30 years, even sometimes less, but this is also a fact. And then we need to work with the region in terms of conflict prevention. We are highlighting our effort on the issue of the youth organization with very weak, the women groups, the civil society, and we are focusing all our effort on those pillars because we think that can help also to revigorate a little bit the political situation in the country. And also we are encouraging political dialogue in order to find a peaceful solution to their problem, differences.
Thank you. I think I would rather focus my attention on the question that was posed to me. A war-making state and a peacemaking state. That war-making state, and we can talk on the side without going deep in history. Europe had its own conversation. In the long 18th century, Immanuel Kant's point at the time was about the war between states or between kingdoms and principalities. In order to have perpetual peace, he said, we need to give the decision about war to the hands of citizens. That's why the Republic was proposed. All right? So his point being is citizens got to decide whether or not they went to war. They were subjects. There will be less war. Internally, though, it was not a resolved issue. But the liberal peace conversation is that democracies don't go to war. And we don't have to deal with that now. In Africa, we inherited states that we did not get to decide whether there will be a war-making state. Because that war-making state requires that you have armed forces at any point in time that can control all the means of violence in the country. And see what we've had. We did not have an internal conversation such as that about what gives us positive peace or negative peace, Galtung. We have our own conversations around Ubuntu, Renaissance, and so on. We've never really put it in practice. It means that there shouldn't be indirect violence. It means that there shouldn't be injustice. It means that every citizen should be able to see themselves in the story of their country. What we've had instead is an inheritance elite that has taken all of the machinery of state and of violence to protect itself, not the citizens. So you have to know who your enemy is if you're doing all of that. For many of our states, Nigeria, Benin Republic is not about to invade us. And even if Cameroon tried, it really couldn't. The point is, the collectivity of the citizens must be able to see the expressions of their own aspirations and realize their potential in what the state, through the government, does. That's a peacemaking state. We've not had that conversation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I must say that we have to accept that we had and we have African leaders that have contributed to the peace process in our continent, and that needs to be recognized. We have also to accept that what we are experiencing now is not new, but these are some of the things that have been mounting over the years. I can quickly talk on Libya. It was in the 80s because Libya, Gaddafi himself, is a person who has been targeted by the Western world. And I remember in the 80s, the Organization of African Unity, 2 times they tried to host a summit in Libya. There was no quorum. It was called the Libya 1, Libya 2. And because those people, they have their priorities, they have their strategies, they have not given up until they make sure that Gaddafi is not there. Now, those programs are not new. What we really need as African, we need to discover one another. We have to discover ourselves. And this will depend on how we relate to one another. Because if we do not relate to one another in a way that we are accommodating, and create a situation whereby others will develop natural defense mechanism, we will continue to remain in circles. And that is not going to help our continent, but to help others. Now, we need to build our institutions. They are very important. We are seeing the leadership in the United States of America now, but because the institutions have been there, we see what is happening. And this institution could have not been created today or yesterday, but they could be created over the years. Now, the fundamental for peace, we have identified them, is the equitable distribution of resources, how we allocate them, the ownership of the process, the equal treatment of the citizens, and then to have a common understanding, and the inclusiveness, the youth, the women, they have to be part. And then the African skills, they should come back to the continent. They need to be motivated. It doesn't matter how you got your training. I always say that you sucked my milk as an African woman, and you owe it to me to come back and invest that back into Africa. So that is very important. And finally, moderator, I see you want to stop me. I really want to say Africa must be able to develop her own program, her own agenda, her own priorities, implement them with her own people, with her own funding. And the issue of intra-African trade is very critical. Under Agenda 2063, I'm currently a chair of the African Ministerial Committee for the implementation of Agenda 2063. For this issue of trade between Africa, there is a demand that we must have Africa common trade rules, and also how we can engage multilateral companies.
Thank you so much.
So let us own Agenda 2063.
Thank you so much. Please, Your Excellency.
Well, A very brief remark about the question raised in the audience. About the question was, can we build democracy without Democrats? I think it's an important question, but it must be more precise. Can we build non-corrupt democracy with Democrats? Because the problem is that in the whole world, and not only in Africa, we're shifting from corrupt dictatorship to corrupt democracy. And I can assure you that the main problem everywhere is corruption. And corruption and the lack of national dialogue, those are the principal, the most important factors of unrest and of course, of even of civil war. So we have to address this very, very specific question. Otherwise, you know, you can have democracy everywhere. You have fake democracy everywhere now, I can say in the world. But corrupt democracy can be as dangerous as corrupt dictatorship, because the main problem of the population is how to eat and how to enjoy social and economic rights.
Thank you very much.
I have three things to say. One, Africa is not a mitigated failure. And whatever has succeeded, I believe, whether it's at the national, even at community level, let us know it, let us replicate it, let us use it. That's number one. Number two, I believe just taking a broad brush and paint everybody black or white or brown will not lead us anywhere. And in a meeting like this, whatever it is, let us disaggregate in whatever we say about others. That's number two. Number three, the issue of communication. President called it dialogue. I will say we should talk with ourselves. One of the things we don't have, and we can see it even here, we talk at ourselves. We don't talk with ourselves. I believe Africa will be better off if we talk with ourselves at every level. And if we do that, we will probably make more progress than we are making, both in peace and security and in all other aspects of our national and continental life.
Thank you so very much. Can we give a big round of applause to the panel, please? And to all of you for your incredible insights. We come back to more discussions and more sessions this afternoon and tomorrow, of course. However, let me share this. Following the 2007-2008 violence in Kenya after the elections, I hosted a show called Fist to Five. And on that show, we went into a region and invited victims of violence and perpetrators of violence to sit in the same room. And our effort was to seek the common, was to find out what happened, first of all, and number two, to seek common ground. On day one, they couldn't even look at each other. The pain, the anger, the hatred was potent. By the time we had finished 3 sessions of understanding what happened, who did what, why they did it, we sought and we found common ground. And my message to Africa is, as we talk, sometimes it feels impossible, doesn't it? Doesn't it? Sometimes we listen to all these things and we say, who's going to do it if the leaders are not responsible, right? It's us. It's all of us. And the biggest message for Africa is, if we try, it will make a difference, ladies and gentlemen. I like to share African quotes. As I'm closing, let me share one, but this time, allow me not to share an African quote. I'm going to share one from, I'm a huge fan of Bruce Lee. How many of you know Bruce Lee? How many of you know, yes? No, I can't show you, but I'm a huge fan. And Bruce Lee said, do not pray for an easy life. Pray for the strength to endure a difficult life. And so as Africa, can we just accept it's not easy? We know it's not easy, right? It's not easy. But we have to set up the institutions, the foundations, the processes, and the mechanisms to achieve peace and security. And if we all do our part, we can make an incredible difference. It's lunchtime, ladies and gentlemen. So let's take a break, and we'll be back for more in the afternoon and, of course, tomorrow as well. Thank you so much. 2 o'clock, please, back in the room, everybody, at 2 p.m. Thank you. In fact, 5 to 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. I'd like to make a small announcement before we head to lunch. First and foremost, the president will leave first towards the VIP room, where they'll be having their lunch along with the Deputy Prime Minister of Namibia and the Chief Justice of Uganda. The lunch area for delegates, for the rest of the delegates, will be at the Pomolang venue near the garden. So as you walk out, there are ushers who will be glad to direct you to the lunch area. But please, for those who haven't collected their name tags, you won't be able to access the lunch area. So please go to the counter and collect your name tags in case you don't have one. Thank you. Yes, yes. Sijui kama anajua, lakini nimemtangazia.